One of the most delightful quirks of babies and toddlers is their tenuous grasp on object permanence. The whole premise of peekaboo, for instance, is that if you close or cover your eyes, whatever is in front of you simply ceases to exist until you uncover them again. The logic is quite faulty, unless, of course, you're a small child, in which case it's quite funny. We grow out of this stage when we're about 2, but some of the instinct of it remains as we age. We may close our eyes or cover our ears when we're afraid, like the proverbial ostrich with its head stuck in the sand, blocking out the outside world to trick ourselves just for a moment that what's frightening us will disappear and won't return when we open our eyes again. I found myself playing peekaboo with reality more often than not over the past few months. Sometimes I avoid reading the news for days on end, and I would just open the app, and in the first few minutes, it would upset me enough that I would just close it again. But this past week, I led a fantastic group from our congregation to Washington, D.C., on a trip that was supposed to focus on the intersection of Jewish and American identity as well as racial justice, which it did. But this is a truly unprecedented time in Washington, and we found ourselves immersed in the utter chaos engulfing our government and its ripple effects that we can only begin to imagine. And I did not have the option to look away. We heard a lot of stories and analyses that worried me deeply, but one stuck out to me in particular. We were meeting with my rabbi from DC, whose congregation, like many in the district, is mostly comprised of civil servants and others whose work is directly related to the federal government. He shared with us an email that he had received from a congregant that week, a biologist, a civil servant working in a government agency. And when the flurry of executive orders arrived in their inboxes, she shared that her department gathered, and instead of asking, should we comply with these orders, or how could we follow exactly the letter of the law and no more, the immediate instinct of these scientists was to ask each other, quote, how can we over-comply so they'll leave us alone? This congregant reached out to her rabbi, pleading, I don't agree with these orders. I'm frightened by what's happening, and I'm also frightened that I'll lose my job if I speak up. I have young kids, and my husband is a civil servant too. Please help me. What should I do? A few days later, with her question still echoing in my ears, I returned home and opened the Parsha for this week. We usually focus on the Song of the Sea in Parashat Beshalach, the triumphant celebration of the defeat of the Egyptians. But in the section of narrative that comes before that song, the voices that I heard in Washington and closer to home were crying out to me from the text. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to God. They said to Moses, what have you done to us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians? For it is better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. These are the same Israelites whom we read a few verses earlier departed defiantly from Egypt. But in their fear, in their state of overwhelm, they understandably turned to self-preservation. It's better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. How can we over-comply so that maybe they'll leave us alone? Then comes the response in the next verse of the text. Moses said to the people, have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance that God will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. God will battle for you. You all be silent. Moses, the one who not so long ago stood before a tyrant and said, "Let my people go," may be a little afraid himself, as he says now, in essence, "This is above our pay grade. It's too big for us to try to tackle this. Keep calm, keep quiet. It will all turn out in the end." But Moses doesn't get the last word. The final answer comes from God in the next verse. Then God said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." God rejects Moses' "stick your head in the sand and let a higher power handle it" advice and addresses the Israelites and Moses' fear differently. You're not helpless, God implies. You have agency. It is never better to serve the Egyptians, never better to put your head down and follow orders when they diminish your humanity or the humanity of others. Do not go backwards. Do not stand still, for if you do, the Egyptians will run right over you with their horses and chariots. But there is solid ground under the sea in front of you. Keep moving, keep walking, and your feet will find their footing. You have the power to keep moving forward, but you have to take the next step yourselves. Because yes, God does eventually part the sea, but only after the Israelites take the next step forward. We cannot wait for people with more power to stand up, because they won't unless we make it clear to them that we will brave the unknown of the wilderness over the certainty of servitude, that we are unwilling to stand by and watch as the chariots advance, that we will protect each other, that we will march together, that we will lift up our voices for what we believe is right. The time for sticking heads in the sand or throwing hands in the air in despair is over. Yes, the state of the union is frightening. The state of the world is terrifying. We may feel caught between advancing Egyptians and an endless sea, and we might want to hide under a blanket and wish it all away. But we do not have that luxury. There's too much at stake. For us as Americans, for us as Jews, for us as people called to do justice and love mercy and defend democracy and defend the vulnerable. No matter what your political affiliation or your views on Israel, this is the time to look square in the face of what scares you, because it's only by seeing what is on the other side of that fear that we learn what really matters. Kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tsar ma'od. The whole world is a very narrow bridge. V'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. And the most important thing is not to be afraid of everything. So pick one thing that scares you. Look at it. Don't close your eyes. What's on the other side of that fear? What's worth wading into the sea for? And then take the first step. Lift up your voice on behalf of those who can't raise theirs. Use your time, your talent, your treasure, but whatever you do, do something. Call your neighbor. Call your congressperson. Commit an act of radical empathy. Whatever you do, keep your eyes open and just go forward.
The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. העולם כולו, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר, גשר צר מאוד. כל העולם כולו, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר, גשר צר מאוד. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. כל העולם, כל העולם כולו, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר, גשר צר מאוד. כל העולם כולו, כל העולם כולו, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר, גשר צר מאוד. והעיקר, 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 לא לפחד כלל. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear.